first online event organized by the Master's Program in Greek Civilization offered by the University of Nicosia. I am Avra Xepapadakou, the academic coordinator of the program, and I am here surrounded by precious colleagues. I think that we have a technical problem. Just let me deal with this, please. I will be off for one moment. So here we are again. I'd like to welcome everybody to the first online event organized by the Master's Program in Greek Civilization offered by the University of Nicosia. I am Avra Xepapadakou, the academic coordinator of the program, and I'm here with my good colleagues and students. We will try today to explore an intriguing figure, the last Queen of Cyprus, Caterina Cornaro. Today's event consists of 4 short talks presenting aspects of the personality, the historical and cultural background of Caterina Cornaro, and the impact she had on the arts. After our talks follows a screening of the theatrical production Caterina, Last Queen of Cyprus, based on the dramatic text by Andreas Araouzos and directed by our talented student Andreas Araouzos, of whom we are very proud. May I present to you the speakers, and I would like to kindly ask them to turn on their cameras so that we can see them. Dr. Marios Hatzopoulos, who teaches the course of history, Dr. Marina Rodosthenous-Balafa, who is associate professor in modern Greek literature, early modern Greek literature, Dr. Nikos Pegioudis, who teaches history of art, and myself, I'm a performing arts scholar. We are all lecturers of the Master in Greek Civilization at the University of Nicosia. And here with us are also the theater director Andreas Araouzos and Christina Marouchou, who is the main performer, you will see her later, of the play that will follow. So now I would like to call Dr. Marios Hatzopoulos, who will introduce the last Queen of Cyprus in an attempt to retrace the steps of the fascinating life of Caterina Cornaro. Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Avra, for the opportunity to show our work and let the people know, let the world know of what we do in the University of Nicosia. So I'm going to speak about Caterina Cornaro, and give me just 1 minute to share my PowerPoint. Thank you very much for your patience. Listen to me. If you listen, please let me know. If you listen, please let me know.
Yes, we can listen to you. We don't see your PowerPoint yet.
Oh, yes, give me a minute, please. Not me, to my machine, because machines, you know, have gone bananas these days. Well, I'm starting my presentation. I will shortly retrace Caterina Cornaro's life. Caterina Cornaro led a life full of surprise and wonder. She was daughter to Venice's noblest family, royal consort to the King of Cyprus, mother of an ill-fated prince, and finally, Queen of Cyprus. This is her life in short. Caterina was born to the Venetian family of Cornaro. The family had long associations with Cyprus, especially with regard to trade and commerce. On the death of the Cyprus king John II in 1458, the succession was disputed between his daughter Charlotte and his illegitimate son James, who tried to seize the island. 2 years later, with support from the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, James blockaded Charlotte and her husband in the castle of Kyrenia. When Charlotte fled to Rome, he was crowned king as James II. Seeking political support, James married Caterina Cornaro in Venice in 1468. At the time, Caterina was just a 14-year-old girl. The marriage was carried out by proxy, meaning that the groom was not physically present in the ceremony. Caterina finally traveled to Cyprus and married in person at Famagusta in 1472. James died that he might have been poisoned by Venetian agents, possibly by Caterina's uncles. According to James's will, Caterina, who was pregnant, became regent. The couple's son, James III, died in 1474, before his first birthday, leaving Caterina as the sole ruler of Cyprus. Caterina ruled wisely for the next 15 years, bringing gradually the island under the sway of Venice. She was forced to abdicate the throne, ceding her rights to the Dog of Venice, as she had no heir. As a contemporary source recounts, on the 15th of February 1489, the Queen exited from Nicosia in order to go to Famagusta to leave Cyprus. And when she went on horseback, wearing a black silken cloak, with all the ladies and the knights in her company, her eyes did not cease to shed tears throughout the procession. The people likewise shed many tears. In this way, Cyprus, the last Crusader state, became a colony of Venice, and as compensation, Caterina was made Lady of Asolo in the region of Veneto, all the while retaining the title of Queen. Asolo soon gained a reputation as a court of literary and artistic distinction. Caterina lived there until 1509, when the city was sacked in the Italian wars. Then she fled to Venice, where she lived for another year, dying on July 10, 1510. Thanks very much. That was all from me. I now pass over the presentation to my colleague, Dr. Marina Rodosthenous. Thank you very much. The PowerPoint must exit, and so it will do in a minute. Thanks very much again. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Maria. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can see it. We can see you as well. We just don't see it full screen yet, Marina. But we will wait for a few seconds. It takes some time.
It's fine.
Perfect. We can see everything. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marina Rodosthenous-Balafa, and today I will be discussing Renaissance poetry during Venetian rule, and more particularly, I will be referring to the Cypriot Petrarchistic collection. The transfer to Venetian rule, 1489, Cyprus forged closer links with Italy, where Renaissance was in full development. Renaissance represented a crucial break with the Middle Ages and established a new understanding of humanity and individuality. The term describes both a period in history and a more general idea of cultural renewal between the years 1400 and 1600. Renaissance celebrated great values such as reason, truth, art, and beauty. One of the important early Renaissance writers was Petrarch. Petrarch was born in 1303 in Arezzo and died in 1374. Since 1327 until the end of his life, Petrarch composed and rearranged a collection of 366 lyrics in the vernacular. The collection is titled Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta, which means the fragments of vernacular matters. It is also known as the Canzoniere, which means a collection of songs or poems. Most of the poems are related to his platonic and unrequited love for Laura. You can see here on the left-hand side. It is the epitome of the high lyric style in the Renaissance, full of oxymora and paradoxes, figure of speech, which are seemingly contradictory words and statements. The only example of such a canzoniere in the Renaissance period in any other part of the Greek world is the Cypriot collection of poems. On return to Italy, Cornaro continued to be a very respected and much loved personality who promoted Renaissance culture, letters, and arts in her court at Asolo. Cornaro and her court provided the setting for Gli Asolani, the famous dialogues on the nature of love by the humanist Pietro Bembo. It has been argued that several poets, both Italian and Cypriot, frequented at Cornaro's court at Asolo, or may have had some connection with her. Here you can see the manuscript of the Cypriot collection, which can be found in Marciana Library, otherwise the Library of St. Mark in Venice. Cypriot Canzoniere is an anonymous poetic anthology of lyrical poems written in the Cypriot dialect. The stylistic and linguistic variation of the collection has many researchers nowadays to believe in the multiple authorship model, which means that we do not have one versifier, but many. The collection consists of several poems which paraphrase, condense, or extend verses from Petrarch and other Petrarchan poets, such as Bembo, Castiglione, Sanazzaro, Ariosto. Some dominant motifs in the collection are the unparalleled beauty of the lady, the power of the lady's glances, and the unfulfilled desire. At this point, I will read the English translation of some verses of the Cypriot poem, number 114, the model of which is Sanazzaro's sonnet number 61. The English is by me, but it does not aspire to reflect the linguistic, stylistic, or metrical artistry of the Cypriot poet. Are these the blonde golden tresses to which I was bound by Cupid, who has not been indolent on my behalf? Are these the sweet eyes which own the glance that took my spirit away when they beheld me? Is that the cold white snow and clear ruby that plunged me into the fire, and I am all ablaze in the furnace? Are these the beautiful hands that threw the dart, which was tied in my heart, and yet are so charming? Are these the feet of honor, which whenever they pass by, always make the Senate roses bloom? You can see through rhetorical questions, both the Italian and Cypriot poets elaborate on the beloved's idealistic beauty and try to explain the paradoxical situation they experience, that is, the pain caused by such beauty. All these are common Petrarchan motifs that each poet of the period reworked in different styles, forms, and techniques. That's all from me. Now I will hand over the presentation to my colleague, Nikos Pegioudis, who will talk about the artistic representation of Cornaro in European painting. Nicola, the screen
Marina.
Is yours.
Okay, thank you, Marina, for the very interesting talk. One moment to share my screen also. and it's a pleasure taking part in this first online event of our department. So, about Caterina Cornaro in European painting. Okay. One moment, because I'm trying to change the slide. Okay, that went too far. Okay, so we know today of 35 to 40 representations of Caterina Cornaro in European painting, created during her life, or the vast majority of them posthumously. And we have portraits from the 15th to the 19th century. Some of them are in art collections around the world, from Cyprus to the United States of America, while others we only know through references in written sources. So the question that I will try to answer today is, why this interest in Caterina Cornaro throughout 4 centuries? And I give you 4 possible answers, or combined answers. First, because Caterina Cornaro was shortly after her death mythologized, a myth that was strengthened through nostalgia as Venice gradually lost its power as an important naval force in the Mediterranean. Second, because the dramatic events of Cornaro's life sparked the imagination of many artists, especially during the 19th century, artists from the Romantic movement who wrote stories, composed operas, and painted pictures, usually illustrating the climax of those events. Now, it goes without saying that those works are far from being historically accurate, and Caterina Cornaro usually enters the stage or the canvas as a very idealized figure. The third reason has to do with the paradoxical situation of having a royal sovereign deriving from a republic, a Venetian queen. And of course, with the fact that Caterina was a woman in such a high power position, which was not usual at the time, especially in Italy. Lastly, part of Caterina Cornaro's appeal to Western painters can be explained within the wider context of Orientalism, or the appeal of the exotic other to the West. You see here a portrait, the first known portrait of Caterina Cornaro by the Italian painter Gentile Bellini. And actually, we can, by seeing this, we can better grasp the discrepancy between the historical and the idealized figure of Caterina Cornaro. If we compare this first known portrait, and this is also the only one unanimously acknowledged as authentic, with later idealized depictions, romanticized depictions of Caterina, you will see the difference. So this first portrait was created by Bellini at around 1500, so during Caterina's lifetime, and presents an image of Caterina which corresponds to her description by chroniclers such as Antonio Colbertaldo as being of medium stature, rather corpulent than lean, and with very lively eyes. The importance of Caterina for Venice is suggested through her pose, attire, which has this copper color, and this is a indirect reference to Cyprus as an important place for copper trade, production and trade of copper. And there is also an inscription, quite unusual in this work, written by Bellini himself, which rather, you can see it as an advertisement of rather his own skills than of the queen itself. So it writes, the Senate of Venice calls me daughter, and we have Caterina, okay, narrating the text of the inscription. Cyprus, seat of 9 kingdoms, is subject to me. You see how important I am, yet greater still is the hand of Gentile Bellini, which has captured my image on such a small panel. And Caterina's portrait, which is at the center of visual arts and research at Nicosia, should be connected to those chroniclers that helped creating a mythological image of her, and who also promoted at the same time the glory of Venice. For example, Gianfrancesco Loredano compared Caterina Cornaro with Venus, writing about her supernatural beauty and concluding that with her, Venus returned to Cyprus. And this allusion can be read in the portrait that you see here through this gesture of Caterina who holds an apple in her hands, and this is a reference to the Judgment of Paris. And the portrait is also significant for Caterina's attires, the saia and the alazza, which attest to the ties of the former queen with Cyprus. And this is also a garment, a cloth that Andreas will talk to you about it, that it was used in the play that you're about to watch soon. In this same tradition of Caterina Cornaro's Venus return to Cyprus, also belongs this unusual depiction of her birth. So she's here in the bed of birth, okay, as a baby. Of course, it is a fantastical depiction of the event, which is attended by the 3 graces here, which also symbolize Caterina's supernatural beauty. Another important in this same tradition depicting idealized, fantastical representations of scenes from Caterina's life is this painting by the Greek painter Antonio Vasilaki, or as he was known in Venice, Antonio Vasilaki Aliense, the foreigner, which depicts the arrival of Cornaro at Venice after being forced to abdicate. So she returns from Cyprus to Venice. This is why she doesn't wear her crown anymore. And the peculiar thing here is that she's wearing her prenuptial dress, the white prenuptial dress that she had on her departure from Venice to Cyprus. And I will close this short presentation with 2 works that belong to the Romantic tradition. The first one is by the Austrian painter Hans Mackart. This is a gigantic painting. It's 400 by 1,060 centimeters. And it was exhibited at the Vienna's World's Fair of 1873, and it was quite a success. So the room where it was placed would remain open also in the nighttime for the people to be able to see it, to watch it. Another peculiar detail here is that the figure of Cornaro that you see here was based on Mackart's first wife, Amalie, who was ill at the time and died before the end of the exhibition. And next to her, her father, supposedly here in the portrait, was modeled after the famous Viennese actor Ludwig Gabillon. And here you see Amalie Mackart dressed as Caterina Cornaro. And the last one, the last painting, it's by the Italian painter Francesco Hayez. It's called Caterina Cornaro Deposed from the Throne of Cyprus. It shows Giorgio Cornaro, the man in the red cloak, convincing his sister to abdicate. And it was painting after commissioned by Antonio Frizzoni from Bergamo, and the inspiration came from Gaetano Donizetti's opera Caterina Cornaro, which in its turn was inspired by Fromental Halevi's opera La Reine de Cyprus, the Queen of Cyprus. So the painting itself was exhibited at the Donizetti Theater in Bergamo until 1994, and the place looks more like a Venetian palace than a Cypriot setting. But as we read these operatic renditions of Cornaro, this actually brings us to the next speaker, Avra, who will talk to you about Caterina at the opera. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nico. Can you please stay unmuted, because I would just like you to confirm that you can see my shared PowerPoint. So
Sure.
For a few seconds, please. Okay, let me share. Okay, so just let me know, please.
Yes,
Yes?
it's full screen, we see it.
Perfect. Okay, so in my talk today, I will discuss the presence of Caterina Cornaro on the European operatic stage of the 19th century. This famous historical figure inspired 5 operas, very successful in their time. They were all produced in a single decade, the 1840s, a time when the genre of grand opera was the latest thing in fashion. It all started when the French playwright Jules-Henri Vernois de Saint-Georges in 1841 wrote the first dramatic text on the story of the last Queen of Cyprus. Although Saint-Georges was a freelancer writer, he had already managed to sell his libretto at least twice. That means to 2 different composers who would set it to music and stage it. The first was the renowned regent of the Grand Opera, Fromental Halevi, and the second, a German composer, Franz Paul Lachner, forgotten today but important at the time. Both operas premiered in the same year, 1841, at 2 top opera houses, Halevi's La Reine de Chypre at the Paris Opera and Lachner's Caterina Cornaro, Königin von Zypern at the Royal Munich Opera House. The plot of these works is pseudo-historical, based on the popular mixture of Renaissance milieu plus a triangle love story with a strong political overtone which characterizes many operas of the mid-Ottocento. Caterina, the niece of the Venetian nobleman Andrea Cornaro, is about to marry her sweetheart, the French knight Gérard de Coucy, Geraldo in the Italian libretto, when all of a sudden the senator Mocenigo, representing the will of the Council of Ten, demands that Caterina becomes the bride of the King of Cyprus, Jacques de Lusignan, a marriage with great political benefits for both nations, Venetians and Cypriots. Disobedience is out of question, and the couple's attempt to escape together fail. In Cyprus, the new queen arrives with Gérard always accompanying her incognito as if he was her shadow. Many breathtaking episodes and highly intriguing scenes follow, such as Gérard's unsuccessful attempt to assassinate his rival, Lusignan, sparing his life at the very last moment, a number of conspiracies by Mocenigo, who is the hated villain of the group, the declaration of war on Venice, and the fight scenes in the streets of Nicosia. The play, as well as Caterina's love story with Gérard, ends with the death of Lusignan, the birth of the couple's offspring and heir of the throne, and the declaration of Caterina Cornaro as the Reine de Chypre. Reviews of the premieres claim that both stagings were extravagant, expensive, splendid productions of the highest artistic standards, with large crowds and choral groups on the stage, ballets, a large number of performers, dazzling historical costumes, and two set locations, the rigid and gloomy canals of Venice and the mild, charming and welcoming island of Aphrodite. Even the great Richard Wagner seems to have been deeply impressed by Halévy's opera. It is worth noting that he wrote admiringly of the pathos of high tragédie lyrique in his reports to the Dresdner Abendzeitung and the Revue et Gazette Musicale. I would just like to mention some Cypriot tableaus with strong couleur locale, such as the gardens of the Lusignan Casino, the Grand Square, and the port of Nicosia, seen by moonlight, where the action takes place. Let us not forget that Cyprus as an opera setting has been rather popular, as besides the 5 Caterinas that we are discussing today, it stars in approximately 6 more operatic works, with Verdi's Otello being the most well-known. 3 more operas were produced in the few next year. Here's 2 Italian and 1 English. The first Italian is Caterina Cornaro in 1844, with music by the celebrated composer of the bel canto Gaetano Donizetti, and the second, La Regina di Cipro in 1846, set to music by Giovanni Pacini, then a leading composer of the Italian operatic stage. But 2 years earlier, in 1844, an English opera titled The Daughter of St. Mark, created by the Irish composer William Buff, also saw the lights of the famous London stage of Drury Lane. The Italian Caterinas opened in 2 prestigious opera houses, the first Donizetti's at the Teatro di San Carlo in Napoli, il più antico teatro d'opera in Europa e del mondo, and Pacini's Regina at the Magnifico Teatro Regio di Torino. All of 5 operas center more or less around the same dark plot, though belonging to the vast current of medievalism. Historical accuracy is obviously not the central question here. Regarding their reception, when performed, not all of them were welcomed by the critics and the audience. Halévy's opera, with its rich harmonic palette, depicting the infusion between passion and tenderness, stands out as the most successful one. Donizetti's Caterina was the last opera to have its premiere during the composer's lifetime. The opera was a total flop in Naples. It was booed by the audience due to its unsuitable casting and poor staging, worsened by the fact that Donizetti's health was deteriorating so visibly that it did not allow him to go to Naples to supervise the rehearsals and the orchestration. 1 year later, in 1845, the work revised by the composer and with a different ending was more fortunate on the stage of the Teatro Regio in Parma, perhaps thanks to the talent and appeal of the well-known prima donna Marianna Barbieri Nini. The opera was doomed to oblivion for 130 years and revived much later in the 1970s. Actually, Caterina Cornaro was a role that the global diva Montserrat Caballé recreated in London, accompanied by the star tenor José Carreras, and many other big names performed the main role, such as the Turkish soprano Leyla Gancer, who was the first to rediscover the work, Dame Joan Sutherland, Julia Migenes, and the Greek opera protagonist Jenny Drivala. Pacini's Regina, on the other hand, was triumphant in Turin, but sadly followed a limited number of stagings. Although Pacini and Donizetti, of course, was quite popular in the Ionian Islands and belonged to the trendy repertoire of the first half of the 19th century, there is no evidence proving that any operatic Caterina Cornaro was ever performed at the San Giacomo Theatre of Corfu or the Apollo of Dante. In any case, all of these works gave rise to a number of arrangements, adaptations, new pieces inspired by them, and many stage productions and recordings. For more information on the operatic fortunes of Caterina Cornaro, those interested may consult the detailed article of Professor Angel Nicolaou Conari. And let us not forget the very successful exposition on Caterina Cornaro at the Opera, organized by the Leventis Museum in 2016. But now it is time to surrender the podium to my dear student and capable director, Andreas Araouzos, who, with the help of his collaborators, has promoted the figure of Caterina Cornaro on the Cypriot theatrical stage. Andrea, it is your turn now. I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And can you please tell me if I'm heard okay?
Perfectly.
Thank you. It's what an honor it is to follow these talks and these professors and doctors. It's a huge honor to follow them, and it's a huge honor for our theater performance to follow the presentation of all these beautiful and immensely interesting artworks on Caterina Cornaro. I will also share my presentation, my very short presentation before we watch our performance. Can you see it?
Yes, we surely can.
Okay, so this is this was our poster for Caterina, Last Queen of Cyprus. This is a dramatic monologue, as Dr. Pegioudis said. The dramatic life and events of Caterina Cornaro inspired many artists, and Dr. Rita Severis of the Center of Visual Arts and Research approached me, and she really wanted to inspire the Cypriot audiences and spectators and citizens to link better or at greater depth with our history, with a theater performance on Caterina Cornaro. And so I had asked my collaborator, Andreas Araouzos, who translated a number of works that I directed for the theater, to write this monologue on Caterina Cornaro. This is the beautiful terrace of the CVAR, the Center of Visual Arts and Research, where the performance was staged. The center is a museum presenting the history of Cyprus from the 18th to the 20th centuries through the eyes of travelers. This mainly European perspective is presented through over 1,800 paintings, masses of memorabilia, and costumes. The museum holds also a small reference to the medieval period of Cyprus and basically concentrates on the story of the last tragic queen of the island, Caterina Cornaro. This was a beautiful moment taken from my phone during rehearsal. So you can imagine it was a great setting with a view of old Nicosia when we were rehearsing. So Dr. Rita Severis suggested the books and the texts for the script, which Andreas Araouzos consulted. while she wrote the script. Also, Dr. Severis made sure that the costumes and props used were historically correct and precise. I'd like to say that this show started as a very, very humble, small monologue, a theater event. We were going to have 50 chairs on the terrace for 3 nights only. And it ended up doing, I don't remember the exact number of performances, but I think it was over 12, with over 100 chairs on the terrace because of the demand. And this was a huge honor and a huge surprise, obviously, because we are not talking about a commercial subject, but it just goes to show that people will be interested in something that is explaining the history of our island in, I think, a most interesting manner, and it certainly made up for a great evening with wine as well. We had a number of background slides on the terrace that sort of followed and helped people follow the story of Caterina while she was recounting her story. The slides at the back were anything from portraits of the Queen, maps of the time, emblems and symbols, maybe some portraits of the characters mentioned. On the left, we can see one of the portraits at the center of Caterina Cornaro. Now, the costume, what is interesting is that the costume that Christina Marouchou, who is also with us tonight, the actress, wore for the show, is actually an exhibit in the museum. Now, this exhibit is a replica of one of the costumes in Caterina Cornaro's portraits. And we carefully removed it from the exhibit stand in the museum with the blessings of Dr. Severis, and it was the perfect size, like Cinderella, the perfect fit on Christina. This was obviously a very moving aspect of our performance, to have the actual museum exhibit worn by the actress. I would just like to say that our playwright, Andreas Araouzos, the following year wrote another play called Eleonora of Cyprus, which was performed by 4 actors, again on the terrace of Siva. And then a year later, she wrote an original play again called Bacon Freud, which was based on the relationship between painters Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud. A play that has received exceptional reviews, I am very pleased to say. Now, Christina, here, this picture is from our New York presentation of this show. We have presented Caterina in Oslo, in Norway, and also in New York. In New York, it was part of the biggest monologue theater festival in the world, and we were very happy we were approved to present our show there. Before we start, I would very much like to ask Christina to say hello to everyone watching us tonight before we watch the performance.
Hi, not sure, Andrea, if you can hear me or see me.
I can hear, we can hear you. I don't think we can see you. It's a very dark screen.
Yes, there we go.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for hosting this event and, of course, inviting Andreas and myself to join through our performance. The short talks that we already heard were wonderful and enlightening regarding this historical figure. I'm embarrassed to admit that I vaguely knew of a Caterina Cornaro before doing this play. And I say this because she is such an important historical figure of our island. And yet the story was very vague in my mind. I hadn't been taught it at school and anything. So once we had this rich text by Andreas Araouzos, which is historically accurate, of course, with the direction of Dr. Rita Severis, it was really interesting to see the historical context, of course, but with the direction of Andreas, it was inevitable for me to not see beneath that and see the person of Caterina Cornaro, because the play takes us throughout her life, essentially, from when she was 14 years old to 18 years old, first came to Cyprus, through her 20s, with all this tragedies she suffered on a personal and, of course, on a regal level, let's say, in her 30s and until the end of her life. So going on this journey with this person, it was very difficult for me to see her as a role or as a character. She was so human to me. And with the direction of Andreas, I believe that's what comes out of the performance, and hopefully you will be able to experience as well. So I just wanted to say that I have immense respect and a lot of compassion for her. And she still is with me on a very metaphysical level, in a way.
Thank you, Christina. It's amazing that we started this in 2015 and we are still going with it. And can I just say that it was my very first collaboration with Christina. We've had a number of collaborations since then. This was something, was exceptional work from her. I need to say this because she was called to go and to have a premiere of this. Possibly, I think it was 2 weeks after we started rehearsing. She did an amazing job, and I'm very, very proud to show our performance. And Christina, to you now, I think we are ready to watch the theatre presentation now. And I suppose we'll talk at the end of the show to say goodnight. I hope you enjoy the show.
They had just told me a thing so strange. I stood on the balcony, looked down at the Grand Canal, and stared at my reflection in the clear waters. I had to repeat to myself those words that had been confided in me, for I could then believe them. Caterina, Queen of Cyprus. Caterina, Regina. Father had sent for me. He wanted to speak to me in the crimson salon. He rose to greet me, something he had never done before. I brought honor, he said, not only to our Casa Cornaro, but to the whole of Venezia, for he had just received word from my uncle Andrea, a close companion of King Giacomo II of Cyprus. The king had seen my portrait and lost his heart. He asked for my hand in marriage. Father then bent his knee before me and gave me a miniature portrait of King Giacomo in a case of Eastern pearls, a regal gift sent by the ambassador. Then Father kissed my hand and announced that I was to be Queen of Cyprus. I gazed at the portrait that was blazing with diamonds. How charming was the laughing face of my king. My mother helped me put on my pearls. They were more lustrous than any I had ever seen in the whole of Venice. I was only 14, a little Venetian maiden, though high in birth. I had never taken part in any but the simplest of feasts, never left the walls of our ancestral palace, safe under closest guard only to attend mass, wearing a long white fazzuolo. And now there was this dream and vision of freedom and empire before me. It felt intoxicating. And there was more. Before I could be named queen, I had to be officially acknowledged as the daughter of the Republic, an honor decreed for me. No one else had ever been adopted by Venice before, and this title was to be created for me so that I might wear my crown. Proprium suum filium adoptivam. I was to be a real princess of Venice. Many generations of Cornari had been ambassadors, and senators, and doges, and men of science, and religion, and literature, and they all served the Republic for centuries. But I was to lead them all, and this honor was to bring my country. What a dizzying dream of glory! Clutching my pearls around my neck, I thought how I should start learning to look a queen. Dio. Oh, Dio, how the bells rang in the Piazza San Marco. A true jubilee. Such a festa had never been before. Madre Beata, the crowds were chanting. Santa Maria, Santa Vergina. Every window in the piazza thronged with spectators, watching the procession of the gondolas arriving, all the nobles and the maidens, and finally me. I heard the people exclaim how beautiful I was. I rode in the Pegioudis, the Doge's own vessel, and it was decorated with flowers and precious carpets and cloth of beautiful shiny colors and embroidered with gold, a mere glimpse of the unknown delights that awaited me. The Doge took me by the hand and led me inside the Duomo. The ambassador waited for me, holding a parchment bearing the seals of Venice and Cyprus. The Doge then placed a diamond ring on my finger. And in that moment, my imagination stirred, and I dreamed of a new exotic world, my mythical kingdom. The Serenissimo cried, Caterina di Venezia! And a cry from the people rent the air, and I felt my heart throb as if it would break. I looked at them, opened my arms to them, embracing them. My soul stirred. I felt like a queen already. I had seen the sacred tie between a queen and her people. I was eager to learn everything there was to know about my island. Cyprus. The boundaries of my vision opened up before the narrow confines of Venice, and I dreamed of a world rich in beauty and splendor. I spoke to the Patriarch. I asked him to recount the history of Cyprus for me. I learned about the Crusades and the Christian conquests of the past. The apostles, Barnabas and Paul, had sailed to Cyprus to teach their faith. Our very own San Marco's Gospel was found in Cyprus. What a sacred bond between my two homes. I spent hours with masters, learning the many tongues spoken in the Cyprian court, and I read about the house of the Lusinians, my king's heritage. I felt devoted to this island, this Isola Fortunata that I had yet to meet. Four years of anticipation. I wondered. I looked over the canal looking for signs of ships, while checking my golden engagement ring, ensuring it was there and it was real and not a dream. I heard whispers among my parents and the nobles that perhaps the engagement was a fantasy and the king would not go through with it. But one day, I saw Cyprian ships appearing in the Adriatic. The day had finally arrived. King Giacomo had sent for me. The fleet waited to receive me, and I sailed into the sea, into my future. The galleys were decorated with flowers and banners and cloth and gold and artifacts of silver and beautiful sculptures. At the time, I hadn't realized that they were also well equipped for war, and that all their luxury was a camouflage for the strong base Venice was now to acquire in the Mediterranean. Admiral Bragadino, my Venetian counselor, said that I was to be the delegate of Venice in Cyprus, and that my role was to work for the glory of Venice and the greatness of the Cornaro family, which I was to maintain. I heard the rite some of the nobles sang. See, we wed thee, in token of our true and perpetual dominion over thee. I should have seen that chant as an omen, but love speeded me. Alone in the Adriatic Sea, all questions and doubts disappeared, and I only saw love grown from that portrait of my king. And finally, I stepped foot on my island. I wore my wedding gown, a beautiful gown of gold with a long train. The first vision of the land of my dreams was even fairer than I had ever dreamed it. God's grace had granted me a kingdom, and I felt the horizons open themselves before me. I saw tall churches and high date trees and fertile plains flowing down to the foam of the sea. The Cyprian crowds welcomed me warmly, singing, "Viva la Regina! Aphrodite arrived at her island." My heart fluttered in anticipation as I seeked the crowds, searching the man I was there for. Then someone approached me, calling me queen. How delightful that word rang in my ears. They said a messenger wanted to speak to me, and then a knight, bearing the royal seal of Cyprus, his visor down, approached. He bowed to me, and he said the king had sent him to bear his greeting to me, his sovereign lady. I thought it was not proper for one to speak to me with his visor down, and then the knight stood and bowed to me and took off his helmet. And he said, "Does my message from the king bear no meaning to his bride?" He smiled. He was courteous and charming, and there was a world of love and mastery on his face. Oh, I knew then. Madre mia, how my soul shone. King Giacomo, come potrebbe il mio cuore non ti conosco? How did my heart not instantly know him? We were united in matrimony in Famagusta at the Cathedral of St. Nicholas. It was magnificent. Mio Giacomo. Love had swept me even more than I had ever dreamed, and I was certain there can never be another. So tender and generous with his people, and yet so brave and skillful and powerful in the face of his enemies. A ruler with an iron hand, yet adored by all. He was a man of whom legends are made. Cyprus was very beautiful, and the people loved me as much as I loved them from the very beginning. There could be nothing but happiness in such a home. But underneath all the overwhelming contentment, there was a pain in my heart, a mysterious discomfort. I was not certain that Giacomo enjoyed all of the people's confidence as their sovereign. I heard conflicting truths regarding the facts of his birth, about an old contest with his sister Carlotta, questions about rightful succession. Nothing was ever revealed to me directly, but I began to grow aware of something sinister beneath the smiling surface. Was there a conspiracy to keep me in childish ignorance of the truth, of what was going on within my own kingdom? I tried to ask Giacomo about it, but he kissed my fingers and sweetly demanded that I was not to concern myself with affairs of state. A few months later, I discovered I was with child, and I was overjoyed, and there was no more room in my soul for anxiety or suspicion. I now became dedicated to my purpose. I carried the future king. My Popolo showed their love for me in every possible way, and soon my faith was restored. On a beautiful June morning at early dawn, I stood on a balcony of the palace of Famagusta and waved farewell to Giacomo, who led the cavalcade of nobles, leaving to pursue hunting, their favorite pastime. My husband led the chase as in any art that required agility and strength. He was as beautiful in my eyes as in the days of our first romance. But despite the brilliance of the atmosphere around me, the court was livid. There was something amiss within my kingdom. I summoned Admiral Bragadino, my countryman, and asked him directly what troubled my kingdom. I insisted, begging my advisor to enlighten me. That is when I was told that before Giacomo, my people had taken a vow to Carlotta, the legal heir of my throne. For my husband was not the son of Queen Helena, but the illegitimate son of the late King John by his mistress, a beautiful woman named Marietta. He was known on the land as the bastardo. Dio, il mio Giacomo bastardo. But as hard as it was for me, it was better to know rather than fear the truth. I was glad to know because now I could help the king, my king, who with the help of the Sultan of Egypt and his armies and treasures, he marched into Nicosia victorious, and the people kneeled in his pathway. He managed to win over the crown from his sister. He was a true knight. Carlotta had surrendered her crown because Giacomo charmed all the people. It was him that they loved because he was powerful and generous and brave. Why had Venice said nothing of this to me? Could Carlotta's rights be greater than my husband's? Those Cyprian nobles, those discontented patricians of which I had rumors of conspiracy, were they willing to uphold Carlotta should she decide to return and reclaim her crown? Was that why I had been kept in the dark? So that I'd never question I was rightful queen and betray Venice in the process? One night I dreamt of Melusine, the fate of the Lusinians. She cried 3 times from the ancient tower of the fortress of Famagusta. That meant great misfortune, or even death. I could not rest until I heard the courier announcing the king's return. I craved to speak to Giacomo. But then one morning, I heard the sound of hesitant feet. Uncle Andrea, he was pale and strange, and he approached me and took my face in his hands, looked deep in my eyes, and then opened his arms for me to rest in. Caterina, my child, he mumbled. They rushed me to where he lay. My husband died at the age of 35. He had been on the throne for 13 years. He whispered it was malignant fever, that there was malaria at the coast where he had been hunting. I heard there were poisons in the marshes. Natural poisons one could have used to... But no. No. I refused to make assertions implicating anyone without proof. It was unthinkable. My beautiful Giacomo. Just before he died, he made me legal heiress to the kingdom of Cyprus and his fortune and belongings until a child was born. He was buried with little of the pomp and ceremony usually bestowed on the passing of a king. I gathered all my strength for the funeral and I sought how to do him the greatest honor in preparing his tomb. So I begged for a sarcophagus, a priceless sarcophagus of oriental jasper to be surrendered for Giacomo. My request was denied. Instead, there was a tombstone with an inscription to mark the place where my husband was buried. I placed the sole candle on the grave before taken to Nicosia, to the cathedral where I was to receive the full seal of my authority. In a black dress and a veil to cover my face and tears, the crown was placed upon my head, and I was proclaimed queen. All officers pledged their allegiance to me, and a council of 10 was appointed to assist me. But I could not rid myself of whispers, of rumors. Carlotta, that evil witch, she sailed from Rhodes to Venice and claimed her crown of Cyprus from my own compatriots. And the King of Naples was still looking at my island with longing eyes, but I was the one who inherited the kingdom from my husband. Caro mio Giacomo. I retired to my chambers and clutched his portrait, kissing his laughing face. The council would not let me have a moment of peace. There are affairs of state that require infinite wisdom and dispatch, they said, after penetrating my boudoir. They produced a parchment that contained the clauses of my husband's will. That's how I found out that the children running around the palace, the children I thought belonged to the maids, 3 agreeable children, they were my husband's. 3 illegitimate children. Should my child and I die, Eugenios, his eldest son, would then be king. He was not faithful to me. Mater Dei. Death. And now this. I did not need to be told this. I would rather have kept the memory of my happiness. The grief was too much to bear. I asked my uncle to take me to Pegioudis, a monastery hidden in the beautiful fertile mountains of Pentadactylos near Caterina. Serenity instantly enveloped me. The breeze blew faintly, and there were groves of pine darkly green below the surface. A perfect place for prayer and meditation. I entered the arched openings of the monastery and went to see Father Ioannis, a holy man, known for his wisdom, good judgment, and true vision. A Greek man of the Greek church, a man trusted by my people. He knew the history of my kingdom, the claims on my husband's throne. He could help me in counsel far better than my own counselors could. The holy man reminded me how I joined together with my King Giacomo, the rightful king who wanted me to rule. I was the crowned queen, the only Regina di Cipro. He raised his crucifix above my head, and I promised to live for the people and seek their happiness. There was no other choice for me. How wonderful was my little boy's baptism. Fleets from Venice arrived, and ships from the east carrying costly gifts of welcome. The coronation feast was to take place in the vast banquet hall of the palace. All, of every degree, should share the festivities and pay homage to the infant king. This is your king. Love him, dear people of Cyprus. I had put off my misery so that neither suggestion of gloom nor any hint of evil would even shadow this day. My son was smiling in my arms, so serene and beautiful, a holy picture. But just days later, they started again. All the whispers, the rumors, I felt it all around me. Danger was looming. I saw it in Uncle Andreas' eyes every time he left a council meeting. I heard my mates speaking of fear, that there is always something to fear. I had indeed won the love of the simple people, but in the face of enemies in high ranks, was this not a powerless love? The council insisted that I resided, as if imprisoned inside the Famagusta fortress. An impending sense of doom surrounded me. I could no longer sleep, nor eat. After the baptism, I had no wish to appear in public. The council took my baby away, claiming the royal governess was in better shape to take care of him than I was. I was helpless, overwearied by unknown, heavy burdens. It was 3 a.m. A sharp chime of the great Famagusta bell crashed through the silence. I heard loud voices and people crying out. I rushed to my window. I saw citizens running towards the piazza and armed men, and there was a flash of torches. What was this? Were the Ottomans upon us? Was it an intrigue from Ferdinand of Naples? Was it the Genoese? Or was it Carlotta back from Rhodes? Treason. Someone said they saw a foreign galley in the port. Rizzo Di Marino, my chief of council, entered my room and announced. There was something dark in his eyes. Rizzo shouted at my good friend, Dr. Gentile, "E tu, traditor!" and stripped the old man of his sword, and my physician ran for his life and left the room, pursued by Rizzo. And I stood in the doorway and pleaded, begged for the life of my good friend, but I just heard cries and faint words. And then silence and misery. I was in the midst of a revolt, and I had just witnessed but just one part of it. My heart and brain awakened. I ran down the doorway to the room of the royal governess, screaming, "Madonna Dolorosa, my child!" The Archbishop, what he was trying to tell me was that Naples was plotting for another prince to take over our kingdom. That meant they sought the life of my son. So I ran and reached his cradle and found it empty. I had exhausted every argument to induce the council to restore the baby back to me or disclose his whereabouts. In vain. I did not want to tempt them further with angry protests. Rizzo and the Archbishop entered my room and announced. They produced a parchment for me to sign. It was a letter of condolences to the Republic about the sad fate of Andrea Cornaro and my cousin Marco Bembo, killed by Cyprian soldiers over money due. A blatant lie. I hesitated. "You do not have a choice," they said. "This is necessity." Rizzo approached me and whispered, "The child." Suddenly I sprang to my feet, my strength surging. "The child will be safe," Rizzo informed me, "while your Majesty is careful to fulfill our pleasure." In order to secure the safety of my child. I had to sign letters to the Republic, ensuring all was well within my kingdom and that I was on the side of the new regime. I knew then there was no hope for me. I was under their control. My own council had committed treason. But il mio dilettissimo figlio, I yearned for my boy, so I did sign their parchments without concern for whatever they contained. And I begged them to have mercy and restore my son back to me. Patrizio said he could not promise more, that the child would be safe. The next few days passed in a haze. All I could do was pray that my homeland, Venice, would come and rescue us. Bring my son back to me and reinstate me as queen and him as legal heir. And one bright morning, I saw the flag of San Marco flying at the harbor. Oh, the joy! 10 galleys. I was freed from the fortress of Famagusta and returned to my palace, and my boy was finally given back to me. The deceitful counselors were imprisoned. I was informed that all those letters Rizzo made me sign were letters of surrender for every fortress of Cyprus. Panagiam, what treachery! As I moved with my carriages from the fortress to the Piazza San Nicolo, I heard the city ring with rejoicing. Viva la Regina! Madonna Nostra Reale! I looked up at the Cyprian stars and the gilded roof of the palace and thought of the Venetian fleet anchored at the port and all the men, the traitors, my saviors, my uncle Andrea and my cousin Marco killed trying to protect me, and then thought of all the people rejoicing and weeping around me. I did not know if I was freed or merely moved into a different prison. By now, I had no powers myself. Orders and reforms were decided on by Venice and merely signed by me. I felt incapable of serving my own people. Madre mia, I had now realized that Venice did not have as closely at heart the interests of Cyprus as I did. The Cyprian nobles were already disaffected by the treachery of the old council and were suspicious towards the Republic, but I needed them on my side. In order to deserve their loyalty, I had to earn their favor. I had to give my own people power. I should bind their hearts with the little prince. I should grant them Cyprian titles and give them Cyprian lands. I made the declaration, fill all vacancies with Cypriots. My kingdom would not merely be a Venetian province, and I would not allow myself become their pawn. On a perfect summer day, shadows gathered suddenly and it darkened. My son, he was stricken. I took his baby hands, they were burning. His cry heavy, his breath weak. The doctor came, looked at me, and shook his head. I asked the government that they take us to Nicosia, where the climate is more wholesome. But it was late. Before the day was out, I had to close his arms over his chest, close his beautiful violet eyes forever, kiss his tiny still feet, his tiny head. I was never going to wear the crown he was born to bear. Oh God, have mercy. how my dreams of happiness were crushed again. Filio dilettissimo, for how little time you carried the hopes of my kingdom. They whispered it was malaria, like his father. I could weep no tears. I just sat there, numb. My people came with gifts, rare exotics and flowers from the fields and the forests. He was buried with his father. I gazed at the tiny corpse laying between the legs of my husband. A pitiful glimpse of the last remains of the Lusinian dynasty of Cyprus. I felt nothing. My heart turned to stone. Perhaps the Holy Mother was protecting me. Perhaps there were emotions that were too hard for me to feel. I asked to be taken to Pegioudis. I needed to speak to Pater Ioannis. My God! I would have trained him for you. He should have been a noble man and a Christian king. Why have you stricken me? Why have you stripped me of every joy? I told the Reverend Father that I thought Holy Christus and the Blessed Mother should have been more kind. The holy man scolded me. He said I should never cry out against the will of heaven, that there is comfort for all sorrow if God permits that sorrow. I asked him if God was punishing me for any sin I had committed. He then took my hands, and I felt the spirit of Holy Mary deep in my chest touching me. And I felt her cross. That was by now my world. No, child, no, he said. God chastens whom he loves the most, like his own son. He said I must bear my own suffering, make my people's children my own, be content with the love of my people, and fill my empty arms with the duties of my realm. But I knew not how to live without my Filio. I received a letter from the Doge of Venice himself, declaring the truth, disguised as a letter of condolences. Venice is heir to their beloved daughter, Caterina Veneta. It was as clear as the beautiful Cyprian sky that I was a mere vessel for Cypro to be delivered to Venice after I was gone. It seemed that the demise of my son had severed the last bond between the Cypriots and me. I was only the daughter of Venice now, no longer the wife of the king, nor the heir's mother. I wanted to side with my own people, but that I knew would bring about the wrath of the Republic. I had to take matters into my own hands. It was not enough that they had stripped me of every power within my kingdom and removed all Cypriots from positions of power. Instead of the queen that I was, they treated me like a maid. So I decided to write to the Serenissimo himself, reporting on the abhorrent behavior of the Proveditore towards me. My commands were ignored, my letters opened. They removed all my squires, left me with just 2 maids to wait on me. My royal state was no longer magnificent. I was not allowed to dine in public. I did not have my own chapel and was not granted the ceremonies that befitted a regent. So I wrote to the Doge that if I am the daughter of the Republic and the Republic is heir to Cyprus, what is the impression to be given to our subjects? If the Queen appears poor, then what? Is not Venice also poor? Nothing came of it. I asked them if they allow my parents to come and visit. Surely my father would have some influence on the Republic. The Cornaros were an ancient family after all, and no one would have dared to alienate my father through discontenting his daughter. My parents arrived in Cyprus, and finally, life was not totally blank. My father went straight to the council and demanded that my dignity is upheld. He would not have it that I'd be humiliated anymore. He demanded better treatment for me. My mother said, "Caterina, child, do not tempt the Republica by demanding increased income. You have no need of costly magnificence. Venice cannot support your extravagance." I was no longer the naive 18-year-old they had sent on the island to ensure its captivity. I knew that the Venetians did not like me to be much of a public figure. Their wish was to dominate the island, so their preference was that I keep a low profile. They did not need me as the figurehead for Cyprus. While my father was near, I tried to use his influence on the Republic to allow me to move to Nicosia. The Republic finally gave her consent for her own benefit. I made my last prayer at the tomb of King Giacomo II and King Giacomo III. I wept my last tears at the altar. But a few short months ago, my baby was baptized and crowned. Madonna mia. It is because I love them that I leave them. I have to do their work. And dear Father in heaven, you promise to grant me the wisdom to know my people's needs. I started my journey. I was accompanied by my full court of knights and maidens, a guard of infantry, and an escort of cavalry. The Venetian nobles rode next to me, claiming their part in this honorable service. We journeyed for an evening and a whole long day, and finally saw them in the distance, behind beautiful gardens of palms and cypresses, the churches and towers of Nicosia, slender and white against the deep blue sky. The turrets and crenellated walls of the citadel illuminated, and from the splendid city came sounds of rejoicing. Regina, Madonna Nostra Reale, la benvenuta. I cried tears of joy and entered the church. I wanted to pray to the Madonna as my first act in my new home. I appeared before them in white. I did not want to seem sorrow-weighted and unimpressive. My people, because they were his people, my husband's, the king's, and they should have been his, my little, little sons. Dear people of Cyprus, I need your love, that together we may rule wisely. As I took my seat upon my throne, I felt the light on my face radiating in my soul. I was where I belonged. Days, months, and years of peace and sunshine dawned for me with the move of my court to Nicosia. I was aided by the wisest, most vigilant counselors, by the most devoted maids and servants. The vexatious policies of the Republic had finally relaxed, and I was able to make good decisions for the good of the people without much interference. Venice had also restored my income. And finally, my people could regard me as the ruler they deserved, dressed in my regal mantles of golden cloth and my gleaming jewels, especially these, my favorite teardrop earrings. The Venetians protected my kingdom through the superior force of their galleys. They obstructed Rizzo's revenge plans and Carlotta's orchestrated plots to reclaim my kingdom, and twice saved me from assassination attempts. "13 years passed. I was their Nostra Madonna, their adored Vasilisa. In one of her visits, my mother tried to soften my determination to hold on to Cyprus, suggested that I went home to Venice since there was a danger of the Ottoman. I would not hear of it. I was not going to desert my people. They were my life, and I was theirs. It was announced to me that an embassy of Venice was expected upon important affairs of state, and that my brother Zorzi was chief of the commission. I was so happy. We greeted him with higher honors than any other ambassador. Zorzi said he wanted to speak to me. Alone. He wanted to discuss matters of the embassy as a matter of urgency. I suggested we summon the council of the realm, but he assured me he only wanted a friendly talk with me. I watched Zorzi in amazement as he fixed me with his gaze and said, "It is better for you that there are no listeners," and then ordered me to not interrupt him while he spoke. I was anxious. Was this my brother? Or was it an ambassador? Zorzi said he came with a great opportunity for me, that it was in my power to bestow a gift upon the Republic, that I, the daughter of Venice, would now be memorable throughout the ages. Zorzi said I was from Casa Cornaro, a woman upon whom Venice had bestowed fatherly care and given the throne of Cyprus. Now the Serenissimo was asking a favor of me. An icy bolt shot through me. The opportunity my brother presented was not for the benefit of my own people, but for Venice. My brother spoke to me as if I were a stranger. His tone suggested I was ungrateful and unfair. He spoke about I was a young woman without power. He said that Venice had protected me from my own death. He even said that if it wasn't for Venice, I would have been a slave of the Ottomans by now. Then Zorzi subtly suggested, but it was a threat, clearly, that if I showed faith to Cyprus and turned Venice away, my enemies would have entry to my kingdom through my unprotected harbors. For the Venetian fleet would no longer waste their care upon my ingratitude. If I chose Cyprus, the Casa Cornaro, the Signoria, and the Republic would be offended and leave me to my own devices. Zorzi lastly said that I would bring him harm should I make him fail in his mission. I told him in a voice worthy of a regent, my husband left me queen. I'd rule by his will. Zorzi looked at me strangely and laughed. Has one the right to keep that which he can no longer hold? It was my fault. I should have seen through the Venetian plan from the beginning, negotiated my position from the very start, back when they needed me. By the time my eyes finally opened, it was late. All the power I had was the love for the people, but that I knew was not enough. To abdicate the acknowledgement of supreme weakness, to disappoint my people. And what will happen to my people if I yield? Zorzi promised security and prosperity for them, that Venice would rule Cyprus like her own provinces. My abdication would do them good. If I turned Venice away, I would neither serve nor guard them. The decision was made. I was to retain my title, Caterina Regina, and live in royal state provided for by the Signoria. My brother assured me, his tone softening after my agreement, calling me sweet sister and queen, that I had chosen wisely, and what I had done would send my name down through coming ages wreathed with glory. The Signoria ordered there was to be a royal procession. For me, it was enough to sign the royal parchment and be done with it. But, once again, I was advised to think of the honor of Venice. I had to put on a show. My people. I knew they were devastated. Sometimes I hoped that their love for me would stimulate an uprising, that they demand the decision is revoked, but all hopes were futile. My people lacked national ambition. They did not need to save the integrity of their land. Their well-being sufficed for their content and lulled them into lethargy. I went to see Pater Ioannis in Absinthiotis. I needed to pray for the people. I wanted his blessing. You have kept your vow, child, said the holy man. You are not abandoning them. You are sacrificing your status for them, for they are to be kept safe. He raised his crucifix above my head and I kissed his hand. It broke my heart that this was the last time I could ever confide in him. The day of farewell dawned. The royal cortege passed through the palace gates to the Piazza of Nicosia, where the formal act of renunciation was to be made. And I, in regal black velvet and pearls, rode surrounded by my full court of knights and maidens. I asked my maids to also wear black, and I did not care if to the embassy of Venice this somber choice was displeasing. I could not but express my sentiments. There was a mass in the Duomo, and a Te Deum filled the piazza, the music of thanksgiving. Even though I was surrounded with royal honors, I felt I was being sacrificed. I shall return, I promised them, tears not ceasing to flow from my eyes, and the people lamented with me, sobbing and groaning. How dreadful was that journey through the wide waters to the shores of the Adriatic. I remembered that journey 16 years before, when I made that crossing with hopes as brilliant as the Venetian sky and with a promise. Now as we approached, I saw the grey light of storm clouds and heard the moan of rising winds. Even the forces of nature felt my desolation. The Doge came to greet me. Venice outdid herself in triumph, showering regal honors upon me, and the bells were ringing a jubilee while we glided by. The port was decorated with festive garlands, and the city was a glory of light and color, and the people thronged to welcome Caterina, who had bestowed the gift of her kingdom upon Venice. Caterina Veneta, Regina! The procession of the gondolas came to a pause, and my brother, bareheaded, knelt before the Doge and was knighted for his powers of persuasion. I knelt at the altar at the dome of San Marco. My final act of submission. My homecoming was over. I retained my title, Cypri Hierosolimorum a Carmenia Regina, Queen of Cyprus, Jerusalem, and Armenia. And now the Pelcenturo, that same vessel that carried me to my engagement ceremony all those years ago, now returned me to the Cornaro home. At last came rest. in the silver shades of Asolo, a beautiful town hidden in the mountains, with the sea spreading far below. The Republic had given me this domain in exchange for Cyprus. I was to rule it in isolation. I decided to make the best of my gift. I arranged for works of restoration. I took care of the vineyards and the groves. I imported goods from Cyprus. And I came in contact with people. I managed to become very loved by the people, both poor and rich, both simple and educated. I came in contact with people of ideas and letters, artists, writers. Often, though, I'd slip away from the festivities to walk alone in my lovely gardens of my hillside castle and bring back sweet, sad memories. Those far-off, beautiful lands in Gerina where I spent time with His Holiness. The grounds in Famagusta where I walked hand in hand with my Giacomo, where I carried my child and breathed the fresh air. Those far-reaching gardens, those endless greens, the countless blossoms. Cypro, how fondly I'd always remember you.
"20 years after my arrival in Asolo, Emperor Maximiliano became determined to take over my dominio, and I was forced to return to Venice. In my will, I bequeathed all my property to my brother Zorzi, to whom I felt molte obbligazione. I gave instructions regarding the care and conservation of my property in Asolo. I was ill for 3 days only. I did not suffer. A long procession from the Grand Canal, a bridge of boats, the gondola of the Patriarch, people carrying flaming torches. Each noble bowed his head. Clouds gathered. A gloomy shadow hid the heavens. I was left still in the church of Sant'Apostoli, dressed in the coarse brown cape and cowl of the habit of St. Francis, amongst candles burning about me and above me. The sable hatchments bore the arms of Venice and Cyprus. What of Cyprus then? I felt Queen of Cyprus before everything, before I was wife, mother, woman. I ruled for 16 years, 3 from Famagusta and 13 from Nicosia. How I longed to return to that warm Cyprus sun and do it again from the beginning. But it was not to be. The Lord had other plans for my island.
The sense of bitterness, of regret for ceding my crown of Cyprus to the Republic never abandoned me. And the guilt. If I had striven to instill in my people a sense of pride, would they not so pathetically depend on their own captors? Had I wasted precious days endlessly mourning instead of forming alliances and fortifying my country's defenses? Was I too gullible? Too capricious? Too hesitant? But I was abandoned and alone. My only weapons were love and faith. First and foremost, the daughter of the Republic. My fate was predefined. How could one have opposed? My golden Cyprian crown was never to be worn again by another. Whatever passed or will in the future, my name is forevermore bound to my splendid island. Caterina Cornaro, Queen of Cyprus, Jerusalem, and Armenia reads the inscription incised on a white marble slab at the dome of San Salvatore. From history into eternity. I was the last queen, and still I am Caterina, Queen of Cyprus. Caterina, Regina.
Well, thank you all for watching. That was our theater performance. And it was very moving for me to see our work from 7 years ago, which, as I said, ran for a number of years because of some shows abroad. As I understand, our emails will be given in this in the chat for anybody who would like to email us or send us questions about today. In the case of my theatre work, I'd like to say that Alpha Square can be found on the web, on Facebook, and on Instagram for our future productions and our past productions. I don't know if anyone else from the speakers would like to say something before we close this evening.
A big good night, basically. A big good night from all of us.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Christina, for sharing this with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching.